Well, guys, after 2 years, the return we've all been waiting for has finally come, but is it as satisfying as one could possibly be? Let's find out. Hey guys, come over the series premiere of Sherlock, and finally guys, I have been waiting for this for 2 years now. You guys know that I did review Series 3 back in 2 years ago. It feels like forever since the show has been on, and I did review The Abominable Bride last year, and I didn't hate The Abominable Bride by any means. I just felt like it was a lot of missed potential, and it very much felt like it was deviating away from the, series season premiere, so there really wasn't a lot to explore. So I really didn't know what this episode was going to be like, especially because of that episode. They now have the knowledge that Moriarty's alive and things like that. And overall, I gotta say, this was such an amazing premiere. I mean, such a great return for the show. There was an equal amount of humor, there was an equal amount of drama, and especially the ending. Things are about to get really, really dark, and I'm all for it, really. This episode was great. I really love it. It was such a great return for the show, and it was really everything that I wanted The Abominable Bride to be. Cut out all the past stuff. This is what I wanted The Abominable Bride to be more like. And let's just get into the episode, because there's obviously a lot to talk about. A lot happened in this episode. More than usual, honestly. There was a lot going on in this one, so let's just get right into it. So we start off, and we actually don't start with the way The Abominable Bride left off. We actually start off with Mycroft orchestrating the doctored security footage the night that Sherlock shot Charles Augustus Magnuson, which I completely forgot about him shooting Magnuson, but this is something that the show does get into. The fact that Sherlock shot him and what this did to him, and basically Sherlock is his usual self. He's pestering the elder board member, Vivian Norbury, with questions about ice lollies, and he's constantly tweeting about #freedom. We don't really know what this is about, but he has this constant, he's so fixated on his phone, and we don't know what it's all about. We're not entirely sure why he's so fixated on his phone and what exactly is going on there. And we get this great monologue where Sherlock tells a story of a merchant who comes in contact with death as a figure, and despite his attempts cannot escape fate. And basically, despite the seriousness of the situation, Sherlock's just goofing around. He's just really not taking this seriously at all, we see. And he's off the hook very quickly. They realize that, this was self-defense. This was something where he killed this guy because of stuff he was doing. He would have killed, Mary or John if he didn't kill him, so he's ready for anything that Moriarty could have planned long term. He guarantees he always knows what the game is on, and I think it just perfectly starts things. Now, Moriarty, we don't get a ton of stuff with him in this episode, but the threat of him is very much in this episode. His presence is definitely felt. You can tell that he's really starting to break Sherlock, and I'm starting to feel like that's his purpose, because we kind of saw last, in, The Abominable Bride, that Moriarty is kind of just a voice in Sherlock's head. He is, in fact, dead, and he's somehow contacting Sherlock from beyond the dead. Now, we don't exactly know how he's doing this, but the way this is going, I'm really starting to think that his mission is to break Sherlock, and we very much see that throughout pretty much this entire episode. So Sherlock then tells the audience the story of an appointment in Samara while he wanders around the shark exhibit at the London Aquarium, very much foreshadowing, I think, where this episode goes and where I think this series is going to go, because a lot of people, I think, this could very well be the last series, and I'm going to get into that. But back at the flat, John's writing blog posts, and Mary is becoming increasingly pregnant, we see. She is due any day now, and very quickly, literally immediately, she endures a labored, literally drive to the hospital, and arrangements are made very quickly. We see they have a baby named Rosamond, and arrangements are made for Sherlock to be godfather, and Mrs. Hudson and Molly to be godmothers, which Molly kind of got the short end of the stick in this episode. She really doesn't have much to do. Mrs. H, not really either. Those two characters, I'm sure we'll have more in the other series. This episode, they just didn't really have a ton to do in. I like Molly, I like Mrs. H, but we just didn't really see them a ton in this episode. So, that being said, Sherlock is never not on his phone. Again, he's just completely distracted, and we don't really know if this is a Moriarty thing, or if this is just Sherlock, like I said, himself, breaking. We can't really tell why this is happening, but it seems to be happening a lot. And he's even distracting himself from the christening of newborn Rosamond Mary, better known as Rosie, which is very interesting the way that that's going. So, baby fever aside, Greg has an enticing case, which the case in this episode was definitely a case, but it wasn't a huge part of the episode. It was more just to get Sherlock back on his feet, get him back to doing what he loves. And I know a lot of people said they didn't like the case wasn't a huge part of this. To me, it makes sense though. Sherlock is not really all the way there. He's kind of in another world. He's kind of being trapped in Moriarty's game, and he's not really as focused as he usually is. So it makes sense why this case isn't as focused as it usually is. So it's this 50th birthday, a bust of Margaret Thatcher, a son traveling abroad, and a drunk driver who hits said son's car, sets it aflame, and unearths said son's skeleton charred by flames, already dead for a week, and the details are very confusing, we can see. It doesn't really make a ton of sense, but Sherlock is perhaps even more confusedly distracted by a collection of Margaret Thatcher decor. There's a missing bust after recent break-in, a bust that was smashed on the family's front porch, and he solves the case easily enough. The son had been hiding in the car all along to surprise his parents, suffered a seizure, and died long before the car crash, but he's still captivated by the broken bust. He doesn't know what this is all about. Why are people smashing part of, the decor, Margaret Thatcher's decor? He doesn't really understand this. We eventually find out why, but this is something that Sherlock is constantly fixated on throughout pretty much this entire episode, and I thought it was interesting how quickly he was able to solve the case, because he really did solve it pretty quickly, honestly. I was surprised how long it took him to do that, how short amount of time it took him to do that. But yeah, it definitely didn't take him long at all. He quickly solved it, and, because he was found on, the son was found in a gap year in Nepal, but he still somehow found him, which again, I don't really know how Sherlock did it. I think his mind just works that way. We know how he works. We know how much of a genius Sherlock is, and this episode we see very quickly it's not really about the case, and then we get into what this episode is truly about. So back in Mycroft's office, we get this really great scene of foreshadowing where Sherlock is convinced that something is coming. He doesn't know if it has to do with Moriarty or not, but he knows that something very bad is about to be upon them, and he doesn't exactly know what it is, but it very well foreshadows the big, the big tone, the big shift in tone that this episode really does take. So, another broken Thatcher bust is soon found across town. The trail leads to 6 different places in Georgia where the busts are produced, and Greg calls with a third case, only this time a woman's dead body and 2 smashed busts come along with it. So, again, clearly something is to do with, Maggie Thatcher. We just don't really know what it is, and it would seem the culprit is looking for something inside the figureheads. So Sherlock seeks out the site of the 5th base where he encounters an assassin with a talent for underwater mixed martial arts, and he eventually smashes the bus only to find another Agra flash drive that contains the details of Mary's assassin past. Really good action this episode, honestly. He had like some James Bond style action. It was really cool. Identical to the one that John threw in the Holmes fireplace in his last vow. So he very quickly realizes that Mary is connected to this, because we knew that obviously there was something going on with Mary's flash drive, and all is not great between John and Mary. We see John, he's kind of become kind of distant because he knows what Mary's been doing. He doesn't really trust her as much. They're still married, but he doesn't really trust her as much as he once did, and it's kind of sad to see. But the assassin who Sherlock had assumed who was working for Moriarty promises that he'll just kill Mary instead, basically, because he was going to kill Sherlock, but now he's like, alright, I'll kill Mary. So now we have this threat that Mary could be killed at any point, and that definitely was quite crazy to think about. But then we get to, like I said, what this episode's truly about. We see Tbilisi, Georgia 6 years ago. 4 masked figures, one of whom is Mary. The rest are identified as the remaining letters of Agra, including Sherlock's poolside attacker. They rappel into this ornate palace. They start firing off shots, and the odds really don't look good, but we fast forward and Mary's previous partner slips his memory card into a new Thatcher bust at the workshop and is beaten heavily by what we can only assume are opposing forces in the process. So I thought that was definitely interesting to see. And the way the scene was done in general, I thought it was cool the way we got to see Mary's past, because there was a lot of, blanks in terms of how this really worked out, how is she a spy, what happened to her. I thought they did a pretty good job with setting all this up, and the odds don't really look good. So Sherlock actually meets up with Mary to hear the details of her past himself, because there are definitely a lot of things that she is left blank, and he really wants the answers to, which are as follows. Alex, Gabriel, Mary, R, and AJ are a crack team, we find out. So they were at the top of their game and had the tools to betray each other if anyone deserted. Ammo was their code word, and basically, so now we know exactly what happened. This was their team, this is the mission that she encountered, and this is how she ended up to how she was today. And we pretty much see everything from here. We see that something went horribly wrong 6 years ago while trying to rescue an Englishwoman from the Georgian coup, and AJ evidently survived now with Mary's blood on his mind, so Sherlock promises to uphold his vow of protecting Mary, John, and their child. That is until Mary drugs him senseless and disappears to sort her fate out herself, because she feels this is not something that Sherlock is going to want to get himself involved in. The only way that this is going to work is if Mary does this herself, which I understand. I like how selfless Mary is being here, because she knows she fucked up. She knows this is on her. She knows that this is something that, she can't fix, that this is something that Sherlock can't fix. She needs to fix this, and I like that. I like seeing that with Mary's character, and I thought the way it developed her in this episode was really well done. I've always liked Mary, but this episode made me like her even more, and especially with the turn the episode takes, it just really sets it up really well here. So Mycroft's kind of dubious that Sherlock will be able to protect Mary forever. He really is worried that something bad is going to happen, especially because of what Sherlock said. Remember, something bad is coming. We don't know what that's about, but that fear permeates throughout pretty much the entire episode. And meanwhile, she's on a plane to Norway and has left only a letter to John promising her safety in her absence. So John has no idea what's going on. He just knows that his wife has gone somewhere else, and several dice is rolled, disguise and destinations later, and, we see this really good montage of Mary having different disguises, and she's pretty great at it. I mean, there was one where she had an American accent, one time she had, an Indian accent, and Mary eventually comes face-to-face with Sherlock in Iraq. She has no idea how he found her, but he's stuck in a tracer inside the memory stick and dragged a willing John along with him, and I love that he didn't really use John. He used Mary. John's just kind of there for the ride, and John's incredibly annoyed that his wife has continued to string him along a trail of lies. He doesn't understand why she's continuing to do this, and marital disputes aside, AJ has tracked the trio, confronts Mary at gunpoint, and while being tortured in prison, AJ was brought to believe that the English woman betrayed him, that of course being Mary, but before the two can settle their debts, he is shot and killed by a security guard, so that was pretty crazy. I didn't think that he'd be killed so quickly, but yeah, he actually is killed, and that was pretty crazy, the way that turned out. But then we get to the thing that most people had been talking about, and I think this was a pretty crazy scene overall. We see back in England, Lady Smallwood's security information is denied. She's dragged away to Mycroft, who confronts her with the information that she served as the conduit to Agra, and she denies her role in their betrayal. So we know there's definitely something going on here. We just don't really know what that's all about, and we then get this great scene with John, where this really was a great episode for John, I gotta say. Martin Freeman really did an incredible job, especially in this one scene, where we see on a plane, there was this woman that John had been talking to, and a number he'd received on the trolley, and he pursues her over text, but seemingly never engaged romantically. And the way that this scene was done, with him contemplating whether or not, do I text her back? Do I say something to her? Do I try to get involved? Do I do something romantically? It's just such a well-done scene, because there's so much going through John's head in the scene. There's so much on the line of him, thinking, is this a good thing? Is this going to be a detriment to Mary and I's relationship? Is this going to ruin the relationship that we built? And the way that they showed flashbacks as well. There was this great flashback in Christmas where John said, look, I don't like what you're doing, but we're going to try to move past it. And now that he's doing this, is this about to ruin his relationship? Would he really cross that line? Would he really betray Mary? It's just, there's so many things going through his head. Is this the right thing to do? Is Mary even good for him anymore? There's so many things. The woman that he thought he knew is not at all who he thought he knew. And this really makes him start to think, should I just, forge everything? Should I forge this relationship? Should I start over? And that's something that John never has to do more than when we get to the ending of this episode, which I know you guys definitely want me to talk about, where we see he and Mary are summoned to the London Aquarium by Sherlock, who meets with Vivian Norbury, aka Ammo, the true betrayer of Agra, which is kind of cool the way they set this up. Vivian Norbury, essentially, in the beginning, was someone who Sherlock was talking to and kind of just joking around with at the hotel. But she's a lot more than that. We see she actually is the betrayer of Agra. She worked there, and basically, Mary makes a threatening step forward, only to come eye to eye with the barrel of a handgun yet again, and Sherlock may have been the ultimate target, but that's not how this game ends. We know that definitely she's not going to try to kill her, and we're like, okay, Sherlock can't die, so Mary throws herself in front of the bullets, and she's dead. She actually does die, and the way the scene was done, I really did love this scene, because, again, this was all Mary's choice. She wanted to sacrifice herself. She knew that she needed to keep Sherlock alive, and in one final act of selflessness, takes the bullet for him, and it really was quite sad to see. But again, they fleshed out Mary's character so well that I really did feel satisfied. I really did. The scene where John's going to her, she's saying, you know, look after Rosie, make sure she's okay. John knows very quickly this is going to be it. You know, he's doing what he can to get Mary the medical care she needs, but the second that he hears her say, you know, protect, you know, Rosie and make sure that Rosie's okay, he then knows that, you know, he then knows that he can't trust, you know, he knows that this is it, that this isn't, that she's not going to live from this, and she talks about how she truly did love him and how he can't think ill feelings of her and to remember her for loving him and everything. It was just a really well done scene, and I really did enjoy that overall. And she then dies in John's arms, and it was a really well done scene. I thought the actress Amanda Abington did a really good job in this scene. She really put it all out there, and I really did feel her when she said, you know, protect Rosie. Just a really well done scene overall. Very good actress, definitely. Sad to see her go, but I thought it was the right time, definitely. It made sense why they had to do this, and especially when we get to the end, we know that Sherlock had vowed to protect her. You know, he said he'd do everything to protect her, and this starts to put a rift between him and John. John is really pissed that Sherlock didn't protect her in this situation, which, sure, Mary was the one who took the bullet, but he still could have protected her. He could have took the bullet for her. She did dive in front of him, and now, you know, John is kind of mad at Sherlock because he really feels this was a suicide mission, and Sherlock could have stopped her, and he lashes out at Sherlock, and it's very sad to see. I really did feel it sad, but I feel like it's something we've been building up to, you know, John and Sherlock just getting farther away from each other. You know, we started Series 3 with John having a whole life, you know, decided for him, and Sherlock kind of just throwing him into it, and Sherlock kind of being forced to work with Sherlock. That's something that we saw at the end of Series 3, and in Series 4 especially, it's definitely been shown here. So Sherlock then takes this very particularly uncharacteristic approach. He schedules an appointment with John's old therapist. Now, this was very interesting. I didn't expect this to happen, but yeah, he's working with John's old therapist, and that was definitely interesting that we saw that, and we see this great scene where Sherlock and Mrs. H lament the loss, and we see that he's telling her that, reminds him that every time he's become too full of himself, say Norbury, and Norbury, of course, as we know, is none other than Vivian Norbury, basically to make himself feel guilty, to make himself realize that he's not great, and to make himself, you know, realize how real the situation has become. And we then see Mary. She has one last request, which she delivers to Sherlock by videotape, and that is none other than, you know, if she dies, she wants him to save John Watson, save him. But that's not going to be easy, because we see he goes to Molly, and Molly says that the one request that John had is that anyone else be his baby's grandfather. You know, he does not godfather. He does not want Sherlock in Rosie's life. He doesn't want anything to do with Sherlock right now. So how the hell is Sherlock going to save John Watson for himself? That is how we start this series overall. Really incredible premiere. So many great scenes in this episode. But let's just get in this episode and where I think we're going to go from here. So overall, guys, this really was an incredible premiere. I thought they really did go in some pretty dark directions, and they really did do everything with Sherlock in this episode. You know, we had some really fun character moments between him, Sherlock, you know, between him, John, and Mary. We had some great stuff with him and Mycroft, where they're trying to figure out what's going on with Moriarty, because they don't really know when Moriarty is going to strike again. Then we, of course, had Mary's death, and there's a lot of stuff to really talk about within this episode, because I think a lot is going to change from here on out. In fact, Stephen Moffat said that this is going to be the game changer for the show. You know, they've never officially killed off a character. They just think that Sherlock is dead. They may just think that Moriarty's dead, but both of those characters are still in the show. Mary is dead. She's not coming back. You know, the presence of her may still be felt, definitely. The remnants of what she did definitely is there, and the ramifications of Sherlock not keeping his promise to her is also going to be there, but that doesn't mean that Mary herself is there. You know, Mary is gone, and it's very sad to see, but that's something I really did love, is how ballsy this episode really was. I mean, they really did give us everything we need to know about Mary. They showed, you know, how she's done all this, and I frankly did care. I know a lot of people didn't, but I did care. I thought this was quite interesting the way they did this. I thought they wouldn't really be able to close out Mary's character without doing this, and I get that it's kind of something they had to do because Martin Freeman and Amanda Addington didn't really want to work together, but it made sense, honestly. They did a good job at closing her arc. I like the way that they closed things here overall, and I really did believe that, you know, Mary wanted to save Sherlock. I completely understood that. But now let's talk about where we're going from here, because as we know, this has really put a rift between John and Sherlock, and like I said, I feel like we've been leading up to this the entire series, not just series 4, the entire series pretty much we have been, you know. We saw in series 3, John had his whole life decided for him, Sherlock showed up and basically made him come along for the ride, and John and Sherlock have never really been the same since. Ever since Mary came into his life, John's wanted nothing to do with Sherlock, and it's not because he doesn't like Sherlock, it's because he doesn't really want that crime life anymore, you know, he kind of wants a normal life. Mary gave him a sense of a normal life, and now he doesn't really have anything to give him a normal life. Now he has a daughter to attend to, and he doesn't want Sherlock to be involved, because I feel he does not want to be involved with Sherlock's schemes anymore. It's not that he doesn't, you know, trust Sherlock, is that he does not want to be involved with the kind of life that Sherlock has. He wants a more secluded, I think, pleasant life, and Sherlock, he knows, is not going to give him that. So it makes sense why he's so isolated from Sherlock, and the big question is, what does that video message really mean? Does this mean that something bad's going to happen to John? Or is it that John needs to save himself, you know, from himself, really? Is that really what it's all about? We don't really know, because I'm thinking what it means is that Sherlock, you know, needs to save John in general. Like, John isn't the same without Sherlock. I think we're kind of getting to that, and that Sherlock makes John better and things like that. I think that's definitely something that we're going to touch upon. But again, I'm not entirely sure. We'll have to see where that's going to go. I think that's very interesting. Let's talk about Moriarty, because we know that Moriarty's dead. At least I think he's dead. I think that Sherlock is being tortured in his head. I think because of an after effect of the Reichenbach fall, of him surviving from said fall, and him, you know, knowing that Moriarty did in fact shoot himself, I think he's starting to go a little bit crazy. I think that in his head, he knows that, you know, he feels the guilt for what he did. I think he knows that what Moriarty did, you know, obviously, I think he feels he could have stopped, and I think he feels like Moriarty is still out there, and I'm not sure if Moriarty is actually still alive, because again, we haven't actually physically seen Moriarty. All we saw was Moriarty in his mind palace, and there's so much stuff in Sherlock's mind palace. I mean, hell, he dreamt an entire Christmas special in his mind palace. Really, I mean, Sherlock's mind power is unstoppable. There are no limits to what Sherlock can do. He could have very well created Moriarty in his head, and I really feel that Moriarty is really him starting to lose himself and starting to break Sherlock. That's really what this is. Now, if Moriarty has somehow contacted Sherlock in his head, I feel it's a bit of a stretch. I don't really know where they're going with that, but I feel it's really his purpose is to break Sherlock, to make Sherlock not who he is, to distract Sherlock from what he does best, which of course is solving crime. That's what Sherlock is made to do. He's there to solve crime. He's there to put an end to all the crime in, you know, Bakersfield and all those things. You know, that's what he's there to do. But if he's so distracted by that, by, you know, being on his phone and by waiting for Moriarty to strike, this distracts him from really saving people. And that's, I think, what Moriarty's real goal is. Now, if he's real, if he's not, I'm not sure. But that's what I really think we're getting at here, is that Moriarty is doing all he can to break Sherlock. And that's going to be very interesting to see if he's actually successful, because I really don't know if Moriarty will be successful in that regard. We'll have to see, but that's something I'm definitely looking forward to, is seeing where that story ends up going, because I think that's going to be very interesting. Let's talk about Mycroft, though, because Mycroft, he and Sherlock had that agreement that he would protect Mary, and Mycroft knew that he wouldn't be able to protect her. So I don't know if Mycroft, I feel like Mycroft's going to be the most sympathetic towards Sherlock. Like, he's definitely going to understand that Sherlock couldn't save Mary. I think he's going to try to get Sherlock back on the same path. And I definitely feel like Sherlock, you know, he's not going to stop here. He's going to do what Mary told him to do. He's going to try to protect John in any way he can. But I don't think he realizes, how dangerous that's really going to be, because he doesn't really realize what's going on there. I think Sherlock is going to continue fighting crime, but I feel like Mycroft is going to try to get him back on his feet. I feel like we're going to get a much darker type Sherlock next week, where Sherlock is very upset about what he did, and he's going to vow, he's really down himself. I could very well see that happening in the next episode, but we'll have to see the way that goes, because I think that's going to be interesting. And then Greg. I mean, Greg has no idea that any of this happened. I don't know what Greg is really going to do here, but we'll have to see. Sherlock and this therapist. This is I'm very interested in getting at. Why did he go to this therapist? What is the real purpose of this therapist? Is the therapist going to help him conjure Moriarty out of his head? Is the therapist going to get him to come back to reality? Is the therapist really going to help at all? I mean, from what we saw, it seemed very ineffective so far. So I don't really know if Sherlock going to John's therapist is really going to help him out. I think he thinks that it's going to help him out, but does he even really need it? I'm not really sure. I think Sherlock is just kind of starting to realize that he's not himself, and I think he wants to do something about it. Definitely, I think we're starting to see that here. So that also, I think, is very interesting. And then Molly and Mrs. H, what role are they going to play into all this? We really don't know. We know that Molly and Mrs. H, are in fact Rosie's godparents, and that, they are going to be, they are her godmothers. So the fact that Sherlock is not, I think, is definitely going to be a big role. I feel like Sherlock's going to lose pretty much everyone this season. I think he's going to try to distance himself from, distance himself from most people. And I feel like Molly and Mrs. H are prime examples of that. They're going to be in Sherlock's life, but there's going to be a lot of things that they know about John that he doesn't know, and I'm interested in seeing where that's going to go. The other big question, of course, is John. Like I said, this was a really good episode for John in terms of who he really is. Now that Mary is no longer there, is he possibly going to contact that other girl that gave him her number, and that, he never, he didn't know if he wanted to text or not? That I'm also very interested in seeing, because this might be the girl that leads John to that secluded, pleasant life that he wants. He couldn't have that with Mary, but could he have that with this girl? We really don't know. And honestly, there have been talks of this is final series, and I really am starting to believe it. The way that this is going, and the way that things are being set up, I don't really see how we can go past this series. Just the way that things are going here, it seems very final, and especially with a death like Mary's, I mean, it just feels like there's a lot of finality within this season, and I feel like definitely there's not a lot of ways where we're going to be able to continue the show beyond this series. So I really could see this very well being the final series. I'm not entirely sure if it's going to be, but I very well could see that happening. And especially, with the rift between John and Sherlock, that's something we've touched upon, I think, the entire series, and we're really starting to touch upon it now, as well as what's going on with Sherlock and Moriarty. Moriarty has always been the center of it all, the villain of everything, and I feel like that's also a big part of it. And Toby Jones is coming in next week as well, so I'm very interested in seeing what he's going to do. That's going to be interesting as well. Overall, guys, this was such a great premiere. I really did love this episode overall. I thought this was everything that I really wanted The Abominable Bride to be. Not that I didn't like The Abominable Bride, I did. I just felt like there was a lot of missed potential there. I didn't really feel we need all the present stuff, but now I get it. I get why they did that. They couldn't just have an entire episode where Sherlock realizes, holy shit, Moriarty's alive. I like that, the way they set that up there. I understand why they did that. I still don't love that episode. I think it's very poorly written and very messy. There were a lot of things that were kind of half-assed there, but I feel like this episode really did make up for that. This was definitely the return to form for the show. This was everything I really wanted the premiere to be. It gave us all aspects for the show, and I am definitely going to give the first episode of Series 4 of Sherlock, Episode 1, The Six Thatchers, a 4.5 out of 5 or an A-. Only reason I didn't go an A is because I do feel some of the storylines were a little bit messy. I think the case was closed a little bit too early. I get why it was closed a little bit too early, but I feel like definitely, and like I said, Molly and Mrs. H really did not have a ton to do in this episode. They were just kind of there for a couple scenes. Other than that, guys, this is the return to form for the show that I wanted. This was everything I could have hoped in a premiere. It was dark, it was funny, it was insightful, it was introspective. There were just so many interesting things going on with this episode. There's so much potential for where this series could go, and I'm very interested in seeing where exactly we're going to go from here, because I honestly have no idea. Especially after the way things ended here, there's so much potential for how dark things could really get.